In a temple in Egypt, a scribe once carved a list of every king who had ever ruled. One after another their names marched down the stone wall, but then, suddenly, there's a gap. A reign cut short, a name quietly removed. Somewhere in that empty space there was a woman. Her name was Sobekneferu. She was the first woman we know for certain did not just rule for a king, or behind a king, but as Pharaoh of Egypt, not a queen at the king's side. She was the king. The problem is, almost everything about her life comes to us in fragments. A broken statue here, a faint inscription there, a ruined, unfinished pyramid. It feels less like reading a history book and more like investigating a crime scene. So this isn't a story about a perfect golden age. This is the story of a woman who climbed onto the throne just as everything around her was starting to crack. Sobekneferu was born into the powerful 12th dynasty. From the outside, Egypt still looked unstoppable. Her probable father, Amenhotep III, ruled for so long that entire generations knew no other king. He dug canals, reclaimed land, and filled the country with monuments proclaiming order and prosperity. But long reigns cast long shadows. Princes grew old waiting for their turn. Successions got complicated, and if you look at the royal women around Sobekneferu, you can see the system straining to adapt. There was another princess before her, Nefertiti, whose name actually appears in a royal cartouche just like a king's. She was even buried with regalia that suggests she might have been chosen as the heir. But then, she died. After her, the line of the 12th dynasty starts to bend. The names that should have been straightforward begin to twist. A short-lived king, Amenhotep IV, appears and then vanishes. After his brief reign, there's another gap. No strong son steps forward. The dynasty that once felt eternal now looks like a lamp flickering before it goes out. This is the moment when Sobekneferu moves. We do want to have a neat record of a council meeting where everyone agreed to place a woman on the throne. What we have are the scars. Later king lists that try to erase her, and a scattering of monuments that insist she was there. Her throne name tied her directly to the dangerous crocodile-god Sobek, and to Ra, the sun god. Her own name Sobekneferu means the beauty of Sobek. The message was clear. She wasn't just the daughter of kings. She was chosen by a powerful, terrifying god who ruled the very waters that kept Egypt alive. If the men around her hesitated, she gave them a choice. Accept a woman as Pharaoh, or accept the chaos that would follow if no one took the crown at all. And she did not intend to be a temporary placeholder. When she appears in stone, the balancing act is deliberate. In some statues, she wears the traditional short kilt and the false beard of a pharaoh, with her shoulders squared in the standard royal pose. But in others, her figure is unmistakably feminine, wearing a dress that clings to her curves and a wig that frames her face. She wasn't pretending to be a man. She was taking the language of kingship and rewriting it for herself. Imagine the first time she processed into a temple as Pharaoh. Priests in fine linen, holding incense burners still, the crowd outside straining to see who would emerge. They knew the old king was gone. Rumors swirled about the lack of an heir. Some probably expected a distant prince, others expected civil war. Instead, they saw her, wearing the double crown, the sacred cobra rearing from her forehead, all the regalia of Horus, the living god on earth, but worn by a woman whose name invoked a crocodile. There must have been a moment of stunned silence before anyone cheered. Inside the palace, the mood would have been even more complicated. Some nobles owed their status to the old ways. Some priests worried about cosmic order. A woman as king could feel like a crack in the very foundation of the world. And yet, the machine of the state had to keep moving. Taxes had to be collected. Fortresses had to be supplied. The Nile's flood had to be monitored. Sobekneferu's reign, as far as we can trace it, wasn't about grand new conquests. It was about holding together a kingdom that was already starting to fray. She continued the work of her predecessors. Construction at her father's massive temple complex seems to have gone on under her authority. In a fortress far to the south, a simple inscription recording the height of the Nile flood carries her regnal year. That small mark is quietly revealing. It tells us that during her time, the state was still functioning. It was still able to track the flood, to measure, to record. Egypt had not fallen into darkness yet. She was still in control. But the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Local officials were growing more powerful. International trade routes were changing. The steady, tightly controlled bureaucracy of the Middle Kingdom could no longer rest on tradition alone. Sobekneferu walked into this storm with almost no margin for error. Her reign lasted just under 4 years. That's what the more honest king lists say, the ones that include her at all. 3 years, 10 months, and a handful of days. A blink of an eye compared to her father's long decades on the throne. It was long enough to sign decrees, long enough to be carved into stone. But it wasn't long enough to anchor a failing dynasty. And then, she vanishes. There is no richly decorated tomb that we can point to and say, "Idi lies Sobekneferu, first woman pharaoh." There's an unfinished pyramid that some scholars tentatively link to her. Its superstructure was never completed. Its burial chamber is empty. Work seems to have stopped mid-plan, as if the state that began it no longer had the power or the will to finish. After her death, the 12th dynasty ends. The 13th begins with a rush of short-lived kings, many with unfamiliar names. The tight royal story shatters into fragments. Centuries later, when new rulers wanted to claim a pure, unbroken line of legitimate kings, they ordered their scribes to rewrite the story. At Abydos, the pharaoh Seti I had a beautifully carved king list made. It shows him as the heir of a proud, continuous tradition. The problem was, the real past was messy, so he solved it the easiest way he could. He just skipped the awkward parts. There's no mention of Sobekneferu on that wall. No mention of other inconvenient rulers. One moment you are king of the two lands, the next you are gone, as if you had never reigned at all. That's what nearly happened to her. Even her face has been taken from us. A bust in Berlin, one of the only known sculptures of Sobekneferu's head, was destroyed in World War II. It survives now only in photographs and plaster casts. Her monuments were broken by enemies, weather, and time. Her tomb, if it was ever finished, has not yet spoken. And yet, somehow, she refuses to disappear. Her name still circles through ancient scarabs and seals. Inscriptions still attach her titles to the throne. Modern Egyptologists have pulled her from the gaps in history and corrected the record. There was a woman who claimed the full power of Pharaoh centuries before Hatshepsut, long before Cleopatra. She didn't rule at the peak of Egypt's power. She didn't have the luxury of ruling in peace. She held the crown at the moment when the system itself was collapsing under its own weight. That's the uncomfortable truth behind the legend of the first woman pharaoh. Sobekneferu wasn't proof that everything was fine. She was evidence that the old rules were breaking. That, when the dynasty had no clear male heir, the choice wasn't between a woman or a man. The choice was between a woman or chaos. So she stepped forward, took the double crown, tied herself to a crocodile-god, and tried to steer a kingdom through the end of its golden age. For 4 years, it worked. Then the river of history rolled over her. But every time we read her damaged name, every time we find one more chipped fragment of a statue or a half-erased inscription, we are undoing the neat, edited version of the past that others tried to create. They wanted her to be a blank space between kings. We know better now. She was Sobekneferu. She was Pharaoh. And she is part of the story again. If you stayed with Sobekneferu all the way to this point, you already know how powerful a missing name can be. For every woman we can rescue from the gaps, there are others still buried in broken stone and edited king lists. If you want more stories like this one about the rulers who were almost erased, subscribe and stay close. The next queen we uncover might be hiding in a gap you've never noticed before. Thanks for watching.